The evening wind in Red Reed always carried its own manner, colder than needed, older than its years. When the train pulled away, the platform fell silent for a brief breath, as though the whole town was holding itself steady for whatever might come next. That was when Nia Carter appeared. She crossed the platform with an old suitcase in hand, her curls tied in haste, her dress unsettled after a night spent running. In this dry land, the arrival of a young brown-skinned woman, tired, proud, and out of place, drew every eye as if a new wind had passed through a place that seldom changed. Her cheeks still burned. Her father's hand from the night before had been heavy and cold as iron. He had spoken only once before to striking her. "You have no right to refuse." Then he said it plain. Marry Vernon Hale, or walk out of his house as a stranger. Vernon Hale. His name alone made her skin tighten. A man older than her father, eyes always red as though smoked out, hands marked by a life of using force to take what he wanted. The thought of becoming his wife felt like being thrown into a well with no bottom. So before night had fully lifted, she gathered what she could and stepped out of the doorway that had been home for 22 years. Now, standing in the Red Reed station yard, she held herself as steady as she could. The suitcase was too heavy, and her heart felt hollow. Each breath tasted of wind and dust. The men around the platform began to look too long. Someone whistled. Another man muttered something that chilled her spine. She gripped the suitcase tighter, quickened her pace, yet the ground beneath her feet felt intent on slowing her down. Before she could move farther, a tug caught her sleeve. She spun around, pulse rising. It wasn't the touch itself. 3 men were closing in, their smiles carrying no good intent. A tired breath was about to leave her when another figure stepped between them, quiet, firm, without ceremony. August Wilder. He stood before her as if the act were as ordinary as sunrise. No one heard him speak, but his look was enough. A single glance, sharp, cold, decisive, turned the boldness out of the 3 men. No one in Red Reed cared to cross a Wilder. Folks had said so for years. They scattered fast, almost fleeing. Nia meant to thank him, but stepped back and caught her heel on a stone. Her suitcase tipped, and she lurched forward. August caught her by the hand. A brief touch, light, but strong enough to halt the moment. She lifted her gaze, her dark eyes meeting his. Something flickered in August's look, a quiet kind of loneliness she recognized in an instant, enough to tilt her heartbeat off rhythm. She pulled her hand back and steadied the suitcase. She said she was fine, trying to sound firm, but August watched her without hurry, without judgment, as though he could see past the shell she was trying to hold together. "Where are you headed?" His voice was low, plain. Nia didn't know how much to say. She answered, "Away from here." August glanced at the suitcase, then at the worn strain along her shoulders. "Silver Basin has empty rooms. I can take you there." It wasn't a rescue. It was simply a safer road in a place where safety was rare. Nia nodded. A small nod, but the first choice she had ever made for herself. As they left the station, she paused. She turned back to the platform, fading into the dusk. It was the place where she had ended one life, where she had been treated like a thing to be claimed. Wind carried dust across the yard, threading through her hair. She tightened her grip on the suitcase. She knew that from the moment she stepped out of Red Reed, there would be no return. And though she had no idea where Silver Basin might lead her, at least it was not Vernon Hale's house, not a cage, not a hell, only a new place, a place to begin again. Silver Basin sat tucked inside a wide valley. the gray-green ridges circling it like arms holding an old secret. The road into town curved along the foothills, fine stone dust lifting from wagon wheels whenever the wind passed. By the time August brought Naya there, the sun had slipped behind the mountains, casting a light that softened everything for a brief, gentle breath. Dr. Eleanor's house stood beside a narrow creek, with a low porch and pale wooden walls. She was a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and kind. The moment she looked at Nia, she seemed to recognize something in the girl, a resilience hidden in narrow shoulders. "Ever worked as a medical assistant?" Eleanor asked. Nia shook her head. "Not formally, but I'm quick, I don't fear wounds, and I know how to keep things quiet." Eleanor studied her long enough to see that the words weren't only an attempt to find work. They were a person clinging to whatever rope would keep her from being swept away. "All right," she said. "I need someone unafraid of blood more than someone with papers." So that day, Nia began her life in Silver Basin. In the mornings, she cleaned tools, boiled water, wrapped sprains for men thrown from horses. In the afternoons, she mixed medicine, kept the ledger, and helped Eleanor examine the townsfolk. The work wasn't light, but it carried a rhythm. In that rhythm, Nia found something she'd never had before. Peace that wasn't watched, judged, or threatened. At least for the first 2 days. On the third day, August Wilder appeared in the doorway of the clinic, hands in his coat pockets, leaning against the frame as though he'd simply happened by. "Afternoon, Eleanor," he said, glancing around with forced casualness. "Everything all right?" Eleanor glanced from Nia to August, her expression that of someone who had understood far too quickly. "All right," she answered, so short he paused. The next day he came again, and the day after, too. The way he stood on the porch, pretending to study jars of medicine as if he knew their worth, nearly made Nia laugh. She knew he didn't come for Eleanor, and Eleanor knew it best of all. One afternoon, Nia carried a heavy wooden crate to the back of the house. Her shoulder ached, her steps unsteady. Before she could set it down, a hand steadied the bottom of the crate. "Careful," August said, his voice low. They were too close. She felt the warmth of him even without his hand touching hers. "Thank you," she said, though her eyes drifted to a thin cut across his wrist. A long scrape, dried at the edges, likely from a reins rope. "Let me see that," she said. August started to pull back, but Nia had already taken a clean cloth, dipped it in Eleanor's tincture, and pressed it gently to the wound. Her fingers passed over his skin. Only a moment. And August stilled as if something struck him. "Hurts?" she asked. "No," he answered, though it clearly did. Another time, when Nia bent to pick up a bundle of tools, a loose curl slipped down her cheek. She lifted her hand to tuck it back, but August's hand brushed the strand first, so quick and unthinking that he startled himself. "Sorry," he said, pulling away as if from flame. But Nia couldn't hide the small smile that surfaced, a smile that made him look aside, trying to steady himself. A few days later, whispers began weaving through the town. "Who's that brown-skinned girl?" "A stranger from the east." "Trouble, maybe." Nia heard some of it at the market. She didn't react. She was used to such talk. Her life had always been shadowed by eyes that didn't know courtesy. But what worried her wasn't gossip. It was the rumor Eleanor brought in that evening. A wealthy man was paying high coin to track a girl who'd fled a large town east of Red Reed. "He's named Vernon Hale," Eleanor said, her face drawn with a rare unease. Nia gripped the edge of the table. The air in the clinic slowed, as though even the wind outside hesitated to move. Silver Basin was not far enough to outrun that shadow, but at least she was no longer facing it alone. August still stood on the porch, for reasons he never said. When Nia looked up and saw him there, the wind felt warmer, only a little. But sometimes, a little was enough to keep someone moving forward. Morning in Silver Basin always carried the scent of cold creek water and fresh wild grass. In that quiet, Nia stood near the bank, her boots sinking into a thin layer of mud, her hands awkward on the reins of the brown horse August had brought. She could tend wounds with ease, but standing this close to such a large animal was another matter entirely. "Don't look at the ground," August said, tightening the reins. "Look ahead. A horse senses fear more than you think." Nia swallowed. "I'm not afraid." "You are," he replied, his voice steady, stating a plain truth. She meant to protest, but the look August lifted from beneath the brim of his hat left her without a word. Some men commanded when they spoke. August simply stated what he saw. He steadied her as she climbed onto the saddle, her foot brushing warm leather held by the afternoon sun. Once seated, her whole body tightened, as though letting go for even a moment would send her straight to the ground. "Balance with your hips," August said, stepping closer. "Don't lock up. Ease into it." "I am easing," Nia whispered, her voice unsteady. "No," he said quietly, placing a hand on the horse's back to show her the point she needed to hold. "You only think you are." Nia drew a deep breath. But when the horse shifted slightly, her balance faltered. Her hands gripped the saddle, and a familiar arm wrapped gently around her waist. August. For a moment, time slipped like sand through open fingers. She felt his breath near her shoulder, and her heartbeat stuttered like hooves hitting hard ground. "I'm fine," she managed. "I know," he murmured, calm and low. But his hands stayed at her waist one heartbeat longer before he let go. When the horse stopped, Nia stepped down, standing beside him at the creek. The water mirrored the drifting sky, and she felt herself wanting to speak, words she had held inside for too long. "The day I ran," Nia said, her eyes on the water. "My father told me I had no rights, called me an embarrassment, said a woman was born to obey." August didn't interrupt. He stood beside her, not close, not distant, just the way someone stands when they trust another to reach their own truth. "I was scared," she said softly. "Scared of Vernon Hale. Scared of a life someone else wrote for me. Scared I'd never get to choose anything." It was the first time she had spoken it aloud. August bent, picked up a small stone, and sent it skipping across the surface. The ripples widened, even and steady, like a line of thought stretching outward. "I was afraid once, too," he said quietly. "A woman I trusted left with another man. No warning. After that, I figured the safest thing was to stop letting anyone in." Nia looked at him. His eyes held no anger, no grief, only the trace of an old scar, healed but still present beneath the skin. "Then why did you—" She meant to ask why he cared, but the words caught in her throat. August watched her for a long moment, long enough that the air between them shifted. But then, a faint motion flickered in the trees far behind them. Small, quick, almost nothing, but August noticed. He narrowed his eyes toward the thick brush. Someone was watching. He didn't tell Nia. He didn't want fear to break the fragile calm she had found. But when they walked back from the creek, he stayed closer to her than usual. That evening, as Nia tidied the clinic, a sharp thud hit the door. Then another. She flinched. Sunset had slipped behind the ridge and shadows moved through town faster than any other night. Eleanor stepped forward and cracked the door open. A single stone sat on the top step, a scrap of paper tied to it, blank but carrying a meaning no one needed written. Nia stood still, her hand gripping the table. A shadow had found her trail, and this time it had reached her door. That morning, Silver Basin woke to a burnt smell sharper than the mountain mist. When Nia stepped out of the clinic, a column of black smoke was already rolling up from the horse stables on the south end of town. Shouts, the crash of water buckets, and the panicked cries of horses rose together in a chaos too sudden to name. Nia ran with the crowd. By the time she reached the stables, half the roof had collapsed, the timbers glowing red as though swallowing the whole town. A few men fought to pull the horses free while the stable owner sobbed until her voice broke. August was there. He threw water across the burning rafters, his shirt soaked through, smoke darkening half his face. When he spotted Nia in the crowd, something tightened in his expression. Worry, with a flash of anger that she dared come this close. No one knew how the fire started, but the guessing began soon enough. A voice rose behind her. "How long's she been here? A week? And now the stable burns." Never had trouble like this before. The stranger girl brought it with her. They weren't loud words, but sharp enough to turn heads toward Nia. Some looks carried the sting of thorns. She stood straight, holding her ground, though her fingers knotted in her skirt. She knew this kind of judgment far too well. Where she came from, her skin alone was reason enough to blame her for anything. August stepped in before she could speak. He stood beside her, his voice low but clear enough for those nearest to hear. "None of you know a damn thing about her." A few men drew back. August didn't need to raise his voice. His presence carried weight enough. "This fire was set," he added, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "And it sure as hell wasn't her." No one answered. But the silence was thick with suspicion and resentment. When the townsfolk drifted away to stamp out the remaining embers, Nia stayed where she was, her face tight. August moved closer. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because they were wrong. They'll think I'm hiding behind you. You're not hiding." Nia drew a slow breath. "They're not wrong about one thing. I did bring trouble." The words came out sharper than she meant. "You don't understand, August. He won't stop." "Vernon Hale?" August said, his voice dropping. She nodded. "He's the man my father chose, the man I ran from, the man who'd burn down a whole town if that's what it takes to drag me back." Something hardened in August's eyes. "You think I'd let him touch you?" Nia didn't answer. In the crackle of dying embers, they faced each other, close enough to see fear, fury, and something neither of them had dared name. "You keep pushing people away," August said, his tone firmer than usual. "Like you're sure everyone's bound to betray you." Nia looked off, her voice trembling. "I don't have anyone. I only have myself. You don't know what that feels like." "Don't know?" August gave a short, humorless laugh. "I know too damn well." They fell silent. The air felt stretched thin, ready to snap. Nia swallowed her stubbornness. "I just don't want to drag you into this." "You already did," August said. No anger, no blame, just another truth spoken plain. "The minute you stepped off that train in Red Reed." The words hit her chest with a quiet ache, not from hurt, but because someone had finally spoken with a loyalty she didn't know how to hold. The evening wind carried the smell of smoke and dry grass. August looked at her clenched hand, then slowly laid his own over it. "Nia," he said softly, "I'm not letting anyone lay a finger on you." So simple. No ornament, no promise he couldn't keep. Yet it burned through her more sharply than anything. She turned aside, letting the tears fall quietly. For the first time in her life, someone stood with her without asking for anything in return. When she lifted her head, her breath caught. At the far end of the dusty street, a black carriage stood still, as if it had been waiting. And beside it, a broad-shouldered man in a dark coat. Vernon Hale. He had reached Silver Basin, and he was asking every person in town about her. Night had barely settled when the sound of hoofbeats carried down the main street. Not hurried, not rushed, but heavy enough to make the whole town hold its breath. Nia was putting away medicine in the clinic when Eleanor stepped in, her face drained of color. "You need to go," she whispered, her voice almost gone. "He's here. Vernon Hale." Nia hadn't even processed the words before fists pounded against the front door. Two large men blocked the entry, hands resting on their guns. Behind them, Vernon Hale appeared, the same shadow that had stalked her nightmares for months. His eyes swept the clinic, slow and certain, like a predator catching the scent of prey. "Nia," Eleanor said, pulling her toward the back. "Out the rear door, now." Nia had barely taken 3 steps when she ran into a solid chest on the back porch. August. He didn't ask a single question. He took her hand with a grip firm enough that she couldn't pull away. "Come with me," he said. "Now." From the front of the house, a Vernon roared, "I know she's here!" There was no time to think. August pulled Nia down a narrow trail leading out of town. The darkness swallowed them so quickly that only the sound of breaking branches and their ragged breath marked their path. The night wind stung her skin, but she didn't feel the cold. Fear had numbed everything. They reached a small rise. August lifted Nia onto his horse first, then swung up behind her. The moment he settled in the saddle, he snapped the reins. The horse shot into the night, as if driven by the wind itself. Behind them, torchlight flickered, Vernon's hired guns giving chase. "August," Nia trembled. "It's all right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll get you out." The horse veered onto the western trail, narrow and steep, a path most avoided. Darkness pressed in, and the wind hissed along the rock face, turning the world even colder. Only when the torches faded behind them did August slow the horse beside a small clearing, hidden under thick branches. "We'll rest here," he said. "It's still a long way to the ranch." He built a fire while Nia sat with her knees drawn close to the heat. Mountain wind cut at the back of her neck. August caught the shiver. "Come here," he said, not waiting for refusal. He sat beside her and pulled his coat over her shoulders, letting their arms touch, barely enough, yet enough for warmth to spread between them. Nia leaned her head against his shoulder. A small movement, made without permission. For a long moment, neither spoke. In the soft crackle of the fire, she felt August's steady breathing, grounded, sure, like the earth beneath them. "August," she said quietly, not looking at him. "You don't have to do this. Not for me." "I'm doing it because I want to," he answered. "No one made me." Silence hung between them. Firelight caught the strong line of his face, and she found it hard to look anywhere else. "Aren't you afraid?" she asked. "I am," he said, "but not for myself." The words reached something deep inside her, slow, certain, not a promise but truth, plain as bone. And she knew this was a man who didn't lie about what he felt. At some point, the distance between them shrank to half a breath. Nia's forehead brushed his. Their breath mingled. August lifted a hand and touched her cheek. She tilted toward him, eyes closing for a brief moment. But when their lips were about to meet, he stopped. He pulled back, turning slightly away. "I don't want you thinking I'm taking advantage of this," he murmured, voice rough. "You're the one who decides, when this isn't about running." Nia opened her eyes and looked at him. What rose in her chest wasn't hurt. It was a strange relief, mingled with a gentleness she wasn't ready to name. Not because he had refused the kiss, but because he cared enough to know the line she wasn't ready to cross. The fire burned low. The night sky settled over them like a thin blanket. They stayed close until the mountain dew clung to their hair. By the time they set out again near dawn, the sky was paling to blue. August led the horse, and Nia walked beside him. Neither spoke, yet every step seemed to pull them closer, quietly, steadily. When the sun rose over the ridge, a small valley spread out before them. A lone wooden house stood at its center, still and waiting in the early light. "Wilder Ranch," August said. "My home." And that place, along with the man beside her, was the first place in Nia's life she felt no urge to run from. Wilder Ranch sat tucked beneath the mountain range, where tall pines stood, as if they had guarded that land for generations. When Nia and August arrived, the sky was still a pale thread of blue, but only moments later, heavy clouds rolled in, covering the horizon with a gray that warned of trouble. The storm came faster than either expected. Wind slammed against the wooden walls. Rain hammered the roof with a force both violent and strangely rhythmic. Nia stood by the window, watching lightning tear across the sky before fading back into the dark. Each time thunder cracked, she flinched, fear slipping through despite her effort to hold steady. August set a bundle of wood by the hearth and glanced over. He knew mountain storms well, but something in her posture pulled him closer. "You all right?" Nia nodded, but when thunder rolled again, her breath hitched. Childhood memories, those nights locked in the dark whenever her father's anger rose, rushed at her like a wave. August said nothing. He stepped behind her and laid a hand on her shoulder, gentle and firm. "Come here." He guided her toward the fire. The flames lit her face, showing the tremor she was trying to hide. August sat beside her and pulled a thick blanket over her shoulders. But when a bolt of lightning struck near the pines, Nia froze, her breath breaking. This time August didn't ask. He pulled her into his arms. Nia didn't resist. She leaned into him as though that invisible cord inside her, tight for years, had finally loosened, too tired to hold itself tense any longer. "You're all right," he said, voice low and warm. "I'm here." The words were simple, near plain, but they made her close her eyes. She felt his arms around her, steady heat seeping through fabric and breath. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been held like this. An embrace that asked for nothing, claimed nothing, demanded nothing. Just two people standing together while rain drummed on the wooden roof. When the shaking eased, Nia lifted her head. They were close enough for her to see the firelight reflected in August's eyes. And for the first time, The softness rising in her chest wasn't fear. It was the quiet truth she had been too afraid to face. That night, silence became its own language. August didn't move closer. He waited. Naya didn't pull away. She stayed. In the crackle of the fire, their eyes met. Not hurried, not asked for. Just like two still waters meeting in one calm place. The defenses in her heart, the unspoken scars in his, they loosened, warmed by something neither had intended. When their lips touched, it wasn't the kiss of a fugitive or a rescuer. It was the kiss of two souls worn thin by life, and finally finding a place to lay their burdens down. The small wooden room, once filled only with rain, now held soft breaths, careful touches, and the slow certainty of trust. August cupped her face between his hands as if asking, "Are you sure?" Without speaking. Naya leaned her forehead to his. "I want this," she said, not shaking, not afraid, only sure. The night moved with a gentleness she had never known she deserved. August touched her with the restraint of a man terrified of breaking something precious. And Naya, in every embrace, in every shared breath, felt seen, held, cherished in a way no old memory could dim. When the storm eased, Nia lay in August's arms, her head on his chest. Neither spoke. Only the beat of his heart, steady and certain, filled the space like the rhythm of a home she had never had. For the first time in her life, she slept without waking in fear. But peace rarely lingered long on the western frontier. At dawn, when Nia stepped outside to fetch water, she saw a line of footprints in the damp earth, a path circling the house, then disappearing into the trees. August came out behind her and looked down at them. His face hardened. "Those aren't mine," he said. A cold shiver slid down her spine. Vernon Hale had found his way to Wilder Ranch, and the quiet night they'd shared might be the last breath they took without checking their backs. That noon, the sky over Wilder Ranch was so clear it looked like a thin sheet of glass laid over the land. Nia was hanging blankets on the porch rail when the slow, weighted sound of hoofbeats rose from the end of the dirt road. Her heart tightened at once. She knew that sound too well, too deliberate to belong to anyone from the valley. August heard it even before she did. He stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers, his eyes sharp like a wolf catching the scent of danger. The black horse stopped, and Vernon Hale sat atop it, like a long shadow of a past Nia had hoped to bury on the mountain trail. He dismounted and walked straight toward her, his polished boots grinding the dry grass beneath them. "Finally found you," Vernon said, his voice soft, every word tilting the air off balance. Naya stood upright, still holding the edge of the blanket to hide her trembling hands. "What do you want?" "You know," he said, narrowing his eyes, "your father signed a marriage contract. A deal is a deal. You belong to me." August stepped forward, placing himself beside her like a silent wall. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said, low, steady. Vernon laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "Her?" He jabbed a finger toward Naya. "Thrown away by her own family like trash. A piece of goods nobody wanted." Then he turned to August, smirking. "And you, hiding out in these woods thinking you can keep her from me?" Naya felt her lips tremble. But before she could step back, August moved forward until only one breath stood between him and Vernon. "Get off my ranch," August said, This isn't a place for men like you. Vernon's smile thinned. You think I'm afraid? No, August answered, but you'll step back. Vernon drew his gun fast, snake fast. But August caught his wrist before the barrel could rise. The two crashed against each other, fists striking, boots grinding dirt. Vernon landed a hard punch to August's jaw, but it barely slowed him. August's blows landed square on Vernon's face and chest, each one carrying the anger he had held back for far too long. Nia shouted, "Stop!" But neither man heard. August's fury didn't feel like unrestrained violence. It felt like the one moment he allowed himself to fight the injustice he had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. Vernon managed to wrench his arm free and raised the gun. Nia cried out and rushed between them. "Enough!" Her voice broke open across the valley. August froze. Vernon's hand stilled for one beat. Nia's breath came uneven, her chest rising and falling, but her eyes were brighter than ever. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, each word clear. "Not to my father, not to you, not to any contract. I choose my life. I choose where I stand." Something shifted in Vernon's face. Not shame. He wasn't capable of that. But recognition. Nia was no longer the frightened girl he once cornered. Something in her stare forced him back a step. "Believe your little freedom," he sneered. "But I'll be back, and next time I won't come alone." He mounted his horse and gave August one last look. "And you, prepare yourself." When he rode off, dust hung in the air long after his shadow vanished behind the trees. Nia stood still, her hands at her sides, breath uneven. August came to her, raised a hand as if to steady her, then let it drop, afraid to touch something holding itself together by sheer will. "Nia." He said her name so softly, it sounded like an apology. "You don't need to be sorry," she answered, eyes still on the dusty road. "He'll come back, and this time, he'll choose something crueler." August's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." "No," Nia said, turning toward him. "We will handle it." It was the first time she used the word we. Yet Vernon didn't need to return to leave fear behind. That night, when the wind shifted, a strange scent seeped through the ranch windows. The faint, sharp smell of kerosene. August ran outside, and then he saw it. The Wilder Ranch storage barn was on fire. The first blaze rose like a declaration of war. The confrontation had truly begun. That night, the wind shifted suddenly, as if the sky itself sensed what was coming. Minutes after August doused the last lantern in the barn, a sharp crack echoed from the storage shed. A flash of yellow light followed, then a burst of flame high enough to stain the ranch roof red. "Fire!" August shouted. Nia rushed out of the house, wind slapping her face with the heat rolling off the blaze. Flames tore into the wooden walls as if starved for years. Horses screamed from the adjacent stall, panicked, hurting. "August! Get them out first!" he shouted back, sprinting toward the stable door. There was no time for fear, no time for thought. Fire crawled across the yard so quickly the ground felt hot beneath her boots. Nia yanked the stable door open and jumped back as the gray horse bolted out, nearly trampling her. Smoke clawed at her throat, but she turned again. "One more!" she yelled. August plunged inside, cloth pressed to his face, dragging the brown horse out by the halter. The rafters cracked above him, one beam dropped, missing his back by inches. Naya screamed and grabbed him, pulling him away from the collapsing debris. Are you? I'm fine. Move. They barely had a moment to breathe when rapid footsteps hit the ground behind the shed. A shadow lunged forward. Before Nia could turn, a rough hand clamped over her mouth and yanked her backward. August spun instantly. NIA! Two masked men hauled her toward a black wagon hidden in the dark. Everything moved too fast. Nia fought wildly, but a coarse cloth was shoved across her mouth. Hold her! Vernon wants her alive! Their shouts blurred beneath the roar of flames. Nia! August bellowed, charging toward them. One man fired a warning shot, forcing August to skid to a halt. Half a heartbeat, but enough for them to shove Nia into the wagon. The reins snapped. The horse lunged forward, dragging the wagon into the night. Inside, the wheels jolted beneath her. Nia kicked, clawed, fought to rip the cloth from her mouth. The man holding her tightened his grip. Desperate, Nia bent down and bit into his hand. Ah, you little... He loosened for 1 second. 1 second. Enough for someone fighting for her freedom to turn it into a lifetime. Nia tore the cloth away, flung the door open, and without thinking, threw herself into the dark. The ground slammed into her like an iron hammer. Pain shot up her spine. She rolled down the slope, her head cracking against a tree root, breath crushed from her chest. Above her, the sky burned red with the ranch fire, beautiful in a brutal, heartbreaking way. She couldn't scream anymore. On the road above, August rode hard after the wagon, wind slicing across his face. Stop! He yelled, but the wind swallowed every sound. The wagon veered onto a narrow trail. August pushed his horse alongside it, but a gunman turned and fired. The bullet tore across August's shoulder, searing hot. He gritted his teeth. Nia! If you can hear me, jump! No answer. Moments later, the wagon lurched sharply. The driver yanked the reins to steady it. The sudden jolt sent something drifting to the ground by the brush. A pale yellow scrap of cloth. August pulled his horse to a stop, jumped down, and knelt beside it. Nia's shawl still warm in his hands. He gripped it hard, scanning the trees, breath ragged. Nia, where are you? He whispered, as if praying. He found the slide marks down the bank, broken branches, fresh earth. He didn't need anyone to tell him. His heart already knew the worst. Nia! He charged down the rocky slope, stumbling over roots, tearing his palms on sharp stone. The wind whipped harder as he reached the forest edge. And then he saw her. Nia lay between two pine trunks, her face pale from cold. Light rain had begun, thin white drops turning to frost. Soon it would be snow. No. No. August dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. Nia, open your eyes. Her eyelids trembled, but couldn't lift. He pressed his forehead to hers, breath shaking, his shoulders trembling with a fear he'd never shown to any living soul. Please, don't leave me. Snow began to fall, and the night that burned Wilder Ranch became the night Nia Carter lay unconscious on frozen ground. With no certainty she would live long enough to hear the man calling her name through the cold. Snow fell heavier by the minute, wiping away every trace on the ground. August carried Nia in his arms, his breath breaking into short clouds of white in the night air. Her body felt so light, he feared he was holding a spirit, not a living woman. Nia, don't sleep, he whispered, as much to himself as to her. We're still far from safety. Wind screamed through the pines, cold enough to cut skin. Every step was a battle, but August didn't stop. He didn't dare look too long at her pale face, afraid that if he did, her eyes would close for good. At last, between two thin lines of trees, a hunting cabin appeared. Its roof sagged, its window small, but soot clung to the chimney. There had been a fire once, and more importantly, no one knew about this place. August shoved the door open with his shoulder. Darkness met him, but the familiar smell of old wood lingered. He laid Nia on a blanket hanging from the wall and rushed to start a fire. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from a fear he had never known he could feel. As the flames rose, he hurried back to her. Nia lay still, lips turning violet from the cold. August clenched his jaw, stripped off his coat, pulled the blanket down, and lay beside her. He wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her close, letting his body heat seep through layer after layer. "Please, come back to me," he murmured, voice breaking. The chill of her skin made him flinch. He held her tighter, rested his forehead against her snow-damp hair. Each passing second felt like a stone sinking against his ribs. In the blur between waking and fading, Nia stirred. Firelight danced faintly on her eyelids. Then, barely audible, lost in the crackle of flame, she breathed. "August." He closed his eyes, releasing a breath caught between relief and pain. "I'm here," he said softly, voice hoarse but gentle. "I'm right here." Nia tried to open her eyes, but couldn't. Still leaning against his chest, she whispered something unclear, a plea or an apology. August placed his hand on her back and stroked slowly, soothing her as if comforting a frightened child. "No one's going to hurt you again," he said. "Not while I'm here." Night stretched on. Wind scraped against the cabin door. But inside, the fire glowed brighter, wrapping them in a fragile warmth. By morning, Nia's eyes opened. Pale light from the small window touched the ceiling. August sat against the wall, his eyes red from staying awake the whole night. "Nia." He bent toward her, voice soft, almost breaking with relief. "I'm alive," she whispered. "Thank God," August breathed, burying his face in her hair for a moment he couldn't hide. She was too weak to hold him back, but her heart knew with painful clarity that she was safe. "We have to move," August said after a brief pause. "Vernon's searching the whole region. He knows you jumped. Maybe he thinks you're dead, but he'll check every corner of this forest." Nia nodded, though every bone ached. "Where do we go?" "Sheriff Miller," August said. "It's time to tell everything." He helped her stand, wrapped her in her coat, and guided her outside. Snow blanketed the forest edge, but morning light made it easier to read the ground. August scanned the woods constantly, keeping her close. They walked nearly an hour to the main road, then caught a ride from a passing local into town. Sheriff Miller, a quiet but just man, listened to every word. The forced marriage deal, the threats, the violence, the kidnapping. When Nia described flinging herself from the wagon, Miller struck his palm on the desk. "That's enough," he growled. "Vernon Hale's no man of law anymore. He's a criminal." He stood, grabbed a sheet of paper, and signed with a sharp stroke. "Arrest warrant for Vernon Hale, effective immediately." Nia let out a breath, half fear, half relief, half disbelief. August stood beside her, resting a steady hand on her back, silent. But in that touch, Nia understood. Everything had changed. And the final fight had truly begun. News of the warrant for Vernon Hale swept across Silver Basin faster than the mountain wind. That morning, when Sheriff Miller pinned the notice to the board outside the breakfast house, people gathered, their expressions shifting. First surprise, then outrage, then for the first time a look of sympathy toward Naya. She stood at a distance wearing August's coat, her eyes quiet like a lake after a storm. "They know the truth now," Eleanor said, stepping beside her. "They know who suffered, and they know you didn't bring trouble here. You lived through it." Naya didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't hear whispers behind her back, didn't meet prying eyes. Those who had spoken wrongly bowed their heads as they passed. Those who had doubted stayed silent. An elderly woman touched Nia's arm. "I was wrong about you, child. I'm sorry." Naya only nodded. She blamed no one. People believe what they think they see. This was the first time they saw her clearly. Sheriff Miller called every trusted rider to the town hall. August stood beside him, a map spread across the table. "Vernon's hiding in the Dry Ridge Range," Miller said, pointing to the narrow path leading up the pass. "2 men with him. One way in, one way out. We'll close both." "Let me lead," August said. No one argued. In Silver Basin, no one knew the terrain better. Miller glanced at Nia. She nodded. "Bring him back safe," she said, quiet but steady. That afternoon, the posse moved out. Wind tore across the cliffs, sharp as claws. Naya waited at the base of the ridge, not allowed higher, but her eyes never left August's figure climbing the rocks ahead of the others. Dry Ridge was no place for a weak heart. Narrow paths, jagged stone, a drop deep enough to swallow a life whole. But that danger was what made Vernon think he was safe. He wasn't. Millar signaled the men. One group circled from above, another closed from behind. August took the side path, every step cautious but firm. When he slipped past the last boulder, he saw Vernon crouched behind a rock, gun in hand, breath puffing like smoke. "Vernon Hale!" Miller shouted from above. "You're under arrest for arson, kidnapping, and coercion. Drop the weapon." Vernon turned, sneering. "All this over a girl who ran away?" August stepped into view, making him jolt. "Not because she ran," August said, "because you never treated her as a human being." Vernon raised his gun, but Millar cocked his first. "Don't!" One of Vernon's men jumped out and fired. The shot cracked across the cliffs. Both sides ducked. August charged, tackling the man, sending his gun skidding across the rock. Millar aimed straight at Vernon. "Drop it!" There was no way out. Wind howled. Vernon looked around, surrounded, the path blocked. At last he threw his gun down, his hands tense with rage. "You'll regret siding with that girl." August stepped forward, silent for a moment. Then he spoke, voice steady with the weight of everything he had lived through. "No. The only regret I have is not stopping you sooner." Miller cuffed Vernon and let him down. The others tied the 2 hired men. Snow began to fall, dusting their hair. At the base of the ridge, Naya waited. When August appeared, she ran to him. Wind struck her face, but she felt no cold. August opened his arms and she buried her face against his chest as if finally free to breathe. "You're safe," he said, hand firm on her back. Naya shook her head, her voice trembling, but with relief, not fear. "No, we're safe." For the first time since she stepped off the train at Red Reed, her greatest fear shattered, not because Vernon had been taken, but because she finally knew she would never have to face anything alone again. Returning to Wilder Ranch after everything, Naya found herself standing before something that was not yet a home, but no longer the ashes of the fire. It looked like a page singed at the edges, still leaving enough space to write again. August stopped the horse by the porch, stepped down first, and held out his hand. Not to help her, more like a habit carved into him, as if she was the first thing he thought of whenever he reached a safe place. "A bit makeshift," he said, looking up at the roof propped by 2 new beams. Naya smiled. "I've lived in places 10 times worse." She wasn't joking, but the way she said it softened August's eyes in a way he didn't try to hide. They spent the first week fixing everything. No rush to build a perfect home. Only piece by piece, like 2 hearts learning to touch again after months of fear. In the mornings, August repaired the window the wind had broken. The steady sound of his hammer carried the certainty of a man who knew how to stand on his own land. Nia stood behind him, holding the plank. Once, when she got too close, a rope hanging from the beam wrapped around August's shoulder and tugged at him, making him lose his usual calm. Nia laughed. Light, clear, like a small bell that had never rung here before. "Don't tell anyone," August muttered, trying to free the rope from his collar. "There's no one here but us," Nia said. The answer made him look at her a few seconds longer, as if realizing, yes, here, it was only us. In the afternoons, Nia rebuilt the kitchen shelf. She washed each old medicine jar she brought from the clinic and set them neatly in place. When she bent down to blow the dust away, August reached from behind and brushed a thin streak of ash from her cheek. Slow, gentle, almost asking permission. "There's dust here," he said. Nia leaned into the touch, not flinching, no longer afraid. That small gesture held more truth than any declaration Vernon had ever tried to force on her, because it didn't claim, it didn't own. It said only one thing: "I see you. Here. Whole." In the evenings, they sat on the porch together. The sunset spread across the field, still marked by traces of the fire, but dotted now with new green shoots. Proof any land could revive if someone wanted it to live again. "I think this house could become something real," Nia said. "It is, if you're here," August replied, quiet but certain. Nia turned to him. No more words were needed. Sometimes 2 people who had survived too much understood each other best in the incomplete sentences. One mild afternoon, after they finished setting the new stall door in place, August called her name. Nia turned, a wooden board still in her hands. He stood in the yard, not tense like a man preparing for something grand. No borrowed flowers, no candle, no kneeling. Just him in an old shirt still dusted with wood shavings, but with a steady look that held nothing back. He opened his hand. In it was an old silver ring, scratched, the stone worn pale with time. "It was my mother's," he said, voice so even it made her heart tremble. "She wanted it on the hand of the woman who'd keep this place alive. The one, I believe, will keep me on the right road, too." A breeze passed, brushing a strand of Nia's hair against his cheek. "Nia Carter," he continued without flourish or hesitation. "Will you stay as my wife? Not for protection, not because you owe me anything, but because this could be the place you choose." There was no thunderbolt, no tears spilling, only 2 grown souls, one asking, one listening to the truth inside her, standing in the quiet of a western afternoon. Nia stepped closer, very close until their breaths met. She didn't say yes. She didn't say I do. She only set the board down, then leaned into his chest for a long, still moment. Her arms wrapped around his shirt, as if she had finally found a place to breathe. August held her, arms closing gently around her, as if afraid she might break. I understand, he whispered into her hair. And just like that, without cheers or vows, Nia Carter and August Wilder had the first home they ever built. With their hands, with their hearts, with the scars they no longer had to hide. 10 years isn't long for the land, but it's long enough to turn a barren life into a place someone can finally call home. Wilder Ranch, once a patch of earth swallowed by fire, now stretched into sweeping fields of soft green. New fences reached all the way to the creek. 2 more barns had risen. The herd was 3 times larger, and the entry road had been packed firm enough that every wagon left straight, even tracks. People said, if you want to know how well a man lives, look at the ground beneath his boots. And if you want to know whom he loves, watch his eyes when she steps onto the porch. August had kept that same look for 10 years, and Nia, she had become the soul of the ranch. Mornings at Wilder Ranch were lively in a way neither of them had ever known. In a small room on the east side of the main house, Nia ran a school for the ranch children. 10 years ago, the place had been a storage corner still smelling faintly of smoke. Now it was a classroom with a slate board, a few simple benches, and books she had copied by hand. Miss Nia, I can write it now, a neighbor girl squealed. Nia bent down, smiled, and helped correct the letters. June Wilder, her eldest, sat beside them, hair tied high, eyes shaped like Nia's but carrying August's quiet depth. She read each line slowly, carefully, as if every word was a small stone laid along her future path. Little Elias Wilder, just 6, couldn't sit still. He darted in and out, sometimes bringing Nia a notebook, other times craning his neck at the window to see what his father was doing outside. August was repairing the south fence. After all these years, he looked almost the same. Broad-shouldered, wind-tossed hair, calloused hands. But his eyes softened in ways they hadn't before, especially when he caught 2 small heads peeking at him through the window. Watching them, Nia's heart filled so full she sometimes had to turn away to keep from crying in the middle of class. There was a time she believed a life like this wasn't meant for her, quiet, simple, free from fear, free from someone else deciding her future. Now she had an entire world carrying the name Wilder. By noon, she and August sat on the porch. Sunlight brushed the steps, the warm scent of grass drifting on the breeze. Their children ran circles around the yard, their laughter echoing in a way that never got old. Tired? August asked, handing her a cup of water. No. Nia rested her head on his shoulder. Just peace like this feels unreal sometimes. Then don't wake up, August said, slipping an arm around her. There were no poetic declarations between them, no vows carved in stone. Their love lived in small things, the brush of hands passing a tool, the shared glance when a child laughed, the quiet exhale after a long day of work when they still turned toward each other. It was enough to know they had belonged to each other far longer than the span of 10 years. That evening, when the sky turned to honey and the distant ridges glowed with a thin shade of violet, Nia climbed the hill behind the ranch. It was her favorite place, where the wind cleared every worry and the sunset washed everything clean. Below her, Wilder Ranch lay whole. The new barn, the straight fences, the wooden house with its thin ribbon of chimney smoke, two children chasing each other around the well. A simple life. Something she once thought she'd never have. August came up behind her without a sound. He stood beside her, not touching at first, letting his warmth reach her naturally, like always. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Naya breathed in slowly, her voice blending with the wind. "I'm thinking, if I hadn't run that day, if I hadn't met you at Red Reed Station, I might never have known what it means to live for real." August tilted his head, looking at her as if she were something rare he feared losing. "I didn't know what home was either," he said. "Not until you walked through its door." Nia turned and leaned into his chest. The sun slipped lower, wind stirring through their hair, and the whole valley glowed with a quiet light that made time feel like it stopped. No fear chased her anymore. No shadow waited behind her. Just two people, and the life they had built with their own hands. Wilder Ranch breathed easy in the fading light, and Naya Carter knew she belonged here. And to the man holding her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. If this story touched even a small part of your heart, feel free to share your thoughts below. Leave a like if it warmed you, and subscribe so we can meet again each evening for another love story from the old American West. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.